running right on time today. So we're very fortunate to have our last interview piece by Paul Knight, former faculty member here within the department. He's also shared with us some cookies, so I'll be sure to pass those around to everyone. This will be our last temperature, so whether we can dismiss it, so thank you for coming out and answering all on your support. I'll take it away from here.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Appreciate that. And I thought we would, please help yourself to some of the cookies, the Trader Joe's, if you have a particular liking for that type of treat. I thought we'd start with just a little bit of history. 4th of December, what's happened? Well, the first General Assembly in Pennsylvania occurred on this day in 1682, and Duke Ellington opened at the Cotton Club in 1927. Well, I have a not-for-profit and actually not for real institute that I created after I retired. It's called the Center for Responsive and Accurate Predictions, which I then the acronym CRAP. So I come up with a CRAP. This is going to keep having last choice. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I also throw in some of my other humorous slides I come across here, but this is the Old Farmer's Almanac forecast for this past summer, just so that you can see what it forecast and then also hold it to some sense of accountability with respect to, here's the June through August temperature departure and the precipitation percent of normal. And to point out, for example, that the forecast was for it to be cool and dry in the Intermountain West, and of course it was anything but that. And it was also supposed to be hot and dry in the east slopes of the mountains in Montana and Wyoming, and it was not. But the precip, it did do well with terms of hot and wet, so it gets an honorable mention in terms of CRAP. Also, we have a dishonorable mention here for something that was tooting the horn too soon. Some of you may have seen this article that was published, I think it was both on the Penn State news site, and also I picked it up, I forget where it was, may have actually been on AMS. But this came out on September 28th of this year, and it was an industrial engineer student actually designed some software that would reduce the amount of time and money it takes to clear snow in University Park. And it was touted as being, this is, there will be no more snow days. And then I had to laugh because, of course, as you know, that you have brought class the second half of the 15th and all of the 16th. So I thought, I think that's probably worth a dishonorable mention in the CRAP award. And also, a classic case of where the forecasters or the forecast community was thrown under the bus. In New York, with the snowstorm, of course, that terminated classes here on the 15th and the 16th, that New York City was mayhem, and there was 10-hour traffic jam, especially in Manhattan and part of the Bronx. And the claim was forecasters only expected half an inch of snow. That was a lot of hooey, because the forecasts were not that bad. It was that nobody was paying attention in the sanitation department in New York. So these are the sort of dishonorable mentions that I like to give my CRAP award to. But there is a CRAP kudo as well, and that is that the AccuWeather summer outlook was actually pretty darn good. Hot and dry in the west, also muggy with thunderstorms in a large part of the Mid-Atlantic and the Ohio Valley. And of course, we know it was a very wet summer in the Mid-Atlantic area. Not so good by calling it warm up in the Northern Rockies. Look at the Weather Service forecast, though. This was really quite impressive. It was issued on the 17th of May, and the general shape of the temperature anomaly matched pretty well. And it's, of course, the highest probabilities being in the Intermountain West, which was where the highest anomalies were too. And the precip, high probability of above normal, pretty much east of about, maybe 88 degrees longitude. And indeed, that wasn't a bad call either, even catching, albeit not in the right location, the western parts of Colorado. Was more in northern parts of Arizona. So there are some signs of skill when it comes to seasonal forecast, and actually the ones that probably got the best kudos are the Weather Service for their predictions and the colleagues at the Climate Prediction Center. So anyway, the short range forecast. Let's get into the immediate stuff. I can show you some maps and stuff like that, but it's really kind of a snoozer when it comes to the short range forecast. The fact that we're getting breaks in the clouds, I think, is a good indication. The fact that the trajectory of the air is more from the north-northwest rather than from the west and northwest, so that the drier airs be able to seep in here. There'll be two reinforcements of polar air, one either later tonight, more likely, I guess, during the day tomorrow, and then the other one with the front that's coming through later Thursday or perhaps first thing Friday morning. But the main message is the fact that the northern branch of the jet stream is going to flex its muscle and essentially become the dominant driver in the northeast, with several short waves reinforcing the cold air and keeping, most importantly, the confluence zone south of this area into the weekend and through the weekend. In fact, it is quite possible that if we don't get a measurable amount of precip, and I'm depending upon Bill to make sure and twist the arms of whoever takes the op chair on Friday morning, that we don't get a measurable amount, that we could have the longest dry spell of the year. Because if you look at the numbers here, here's the number of consecutive days of precipitation greater than, or actually less than 1/100th of an inch. So traces will be fine, because we already had a trace of a few flurries this morning. But we have to go back to 11 consecutive days. That's all we've had in 2011. 11 consecutive days. I was back in the beginning of January, ending on the 11th of the month. So if indeed we go until, indications are that might be the case, we might go all the way till next Friday. So that would definitely get us 11, 12, maybe even 13 days with no more than just a trace of precipitation. If we don't get the measurable Thursday night with the front, Thursday evening, or if this system on the weekend stays to our south, which odds are favoring that particular scenario. So, but I'll give another plug, a reminder for those of you that are cutting your eye teeth in forecasting. That is that the key ingredients for significant snowfall are very easy: cold air, preferably fresh cold air, as indicated by low dew points. This is exactly what happened in middle of November for us, is that cold air was refreshed before the storm came up. A deep moisture stream, so we want to see subtropical moisture involved. And also, and this is the most important thing, I learned this the hard way in the 70s, especially when I was the snow monitor at AccuWeather, that you need a distinct short wave in the southern branch of the jet stream. Northern branch produces a lot of wind and sometimes very low pressure, but there's no moisture with it. Or limited moisture. Southern branch short waves are very helpful in producing significant snowfall. So that's why the area probably from Oklahoma to North Carolina, at least the mountains of North Carolina, maybe mountains of Southwest Virginia, could get a big storm. Because the early next week storm, this is goes west from yesterday, but the storm is still just offshore. There it is. This is California, and of course you see the limit here of where we can see to. But this is the disturbance. It's in the southern branch. This is at about 38 north and 37 north, and if anything, it's going to actually go slightly south of that location. So we have the challenge of a distinct short wave in the southern branch, cold air being consistently reinforced in the northeastern part of the U.S. And obviously, look at this. Here's a stream of subtropical moisture. Here's Hawaii over here. So we're finding, here's Hawaii, actually from south of Hawaii, the moisture is already being tapped. But the main challenge in the short range forecast is, can we get rid of the low clouds? This is the sounding from Pittsburgh this morning, and there's this lovely inversion somewhere around 850 millibars, and we're just stuck with the low clouds. And it's more a matter of it's like forecasting in California, when the fog will burn off. In this case, is will we get breaks in the stratosphere that are here? And if that's all we had to forecast, then I don't want to live in Southern California. This is pretty boring. So we have this disturbance, which actually has picked up a bit of oomph overnight. This is the 500 millibar 12Z analysis today, and you probably can't see this, but the area I circled in actually is minus 30, minus 32, minus 33 Celsius at 500. That's not fantastic, but it's cold enough, and it's a fresh batch of cold air that is being advected. You see the upper level flow here into the base of a trough. This is the 300 millibar flow pattern with the ice attacks indicated by the different colors and the highest winds of order of 130 plus knots indicated by this purpley color, blue. And indeed, we have cold advection into the base of a trough, but it also is going to be into the right entrance region of the jet. And typically, those are not humdinger developers. It's usually left eggs that we like to see for a big storm. Doesn't mean the jet couldn't reconfigure itself, but the likely location to find a cyclogenesis on the old boundary or development of a new boundary will be somewhere here in the southeastern U.S., not where we are. So it doesn't look like it's going to be we will not be in a favorable location unless the trough really swings around. Here's some free snow forecasting tips. Yeah, you like the eat here, get gas and worms. That sounds like a great place to visit for lunch. But this is a condensation of my experience for having been a snow monitor for the winters of 77, 78, 78, 79, 79, 80. Is to try not to get whipsawed around by the model runs. The models tend to flip around a bit. Of course, now we have many more models than we did in the late 70s. Almost certainly there'll be model, and I'll call it forecaster creep on the storm's northern periphery. I mean, I think I can forecast that better than I can the storm. So that expect it and try not to cave into the avalanche of the snowmongers. The snowmongers are out there. They will try to make it snow even if the odds are well against it. I do believe that this disturbance will likely affect southeastern Pennsylvania, but it's because it's late, that is, it wouldn't be till Monday. And my experience has always been the late storm almost always underperforms. It is not, it's the quick storm that ends up being ones that are kind of fun and exciting this rapid in November. And keep in mind, this is just one of a dozen events, albeit on the early side. So, don't spend your credibility too early if you want to bank on this being an important disturbance in Pennsylvania. In Virginia, North Carolina, yeah, but in Pennsylvania, unlikely. So let's shift gears into what's the connection between cold Novembers and the following December. So I went through, now I didn't know the exact value. I did this probably about a week or so ago, and I don't know what the statewide average is. It's probably going to be about 4 degrees below normal.
We were about.
Yeah.
Yes.
So something of that. So I picked all the way from about 2 to a little over 4. These are the years that had cold Novembers and similar. This is the December departure from normal. There were some very cold Decembers. Well, 1917 was notable, but there are also some very warm Decembers too. 1996 and also 1911. Some of those, of course, were El Nino years. When you add it all up and divide it out, it comes out that December ends up being ever so slightly below normal. And precipitation departure, it ends up being ever so slightly drier than normal, if we were to consider that. So, of course, we're already digging ourselves a bit of a hole, I guess, here in December. It's only 4 days in. But we're probably just a fraction of a degree below normal. So we're kind of on target. If we looked at the, I brought in the Prescient Weather's World Climate Service multi-model ensemble mean anomaly actual values. This is a combination of the ECMWF and also the GFS for the week of 17th of December through the 23rd. So this is just before the Christmas holiday. And the forecast is for the dominant of warm. These anomalies are of order of a half to 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above normal across all of Canada and also into the northern tier of the U.S., with the cold kind of being left over in the deep south. So that would be the, this would be then, if we're trying to add up the next week, so we've kind of talked about the general pattern until around the 11th, which is next Monday, or next Tuesday, I should say, that it would probably be near or slightly below normal. But that could easily get erased by by this warm spell preceding Christmas. And after that, there's not an awful lot of credibility in the skill that we have in forecasting beyond that in the sub-seasonal range. So what about, let's talk about snowy November. So we had a very snowy November, unusually so. And what's the following winter like for snowfall, since snow is of interest to us. So here are the 15 or whatever snowiest Novembers of record. And of course, 2018 showed up at 11.7. We don't know what the season is, that's why it's blank. You can fill in the number as you please. But I highlighted in yellow those which were above the long-term mean. But when you add it up and you look at it, it's 50-50. I think there's 11 above and 10 below. So no message there. Some of the snowiest winters were in there, 1995, 96, and also 1977, 78, when I was the snow monitor. I remember it well. But if we look at the amount of snow, it's 48.8 versus the average of 44.9, whatever it is these things go. So it's about a 10% increase. And of course, we've already invested 11.7 or 11.8, whatever you got over the weekend. So it's not that notable of a trend. You can also look at, and this is to take the bigger picture, what about the snow cover across the northern hemisphere as we get into the beginning of the winter season? This is a tribute to Judah Cohen's work on the Snow Advance Index. He's at AER, and now this is yesterday's snow anomalies across the northern hemisphere, and of course Siberia is also covered. Parts of is that eastern or western Mongolia? I guess that's eastern Mongolia. We get to the other hemisphere. I'm always dyslexic about that. But there's a fair bit of snow in western China, and of course there's above average snow cover in parts of the U.S. I looked at the beginning of November, and here are the 10th month. So this is actually the end of the 10th month, and I looked at the northern hemisphere and found out the years that were most similar to 2018. We were around 12th, I think it was, in terms of ranking, with data going back to 1966. This is courtesy of the Rutgers Snow Lab. Dave Robinson, my colleague, keeps the good records there. So 12 most similar years, starting on November 1st, and to see what was the snow cover like. So what I did was actually, I have it somewhere here, I have the sheet that I calculated, and Kyle was kind enough to, I guess Kyle had to go to a meeting, but he was kind enough to get me the statistics that I developed back in the 80s, I guess it was, the typical distribution of snow in State College for a season. And you can see that there's about 10 or so storms that give an inch, 9 that give 1 to 3, so on. Here's what the average would be for 2019 if we go back to the previous, those 12 years, and see what the distribution was like then. And of course, we've already spent we spent our 1 6 to 12 inch, so that's already gone if you think that you can cash in your chips. We've had 2, I guess, traces or more than 1/10 of an inch. So we would have 7 storms that would have 1 to 3 inches, 3 to 3 to 6, and a 1 or 20% chance we can get over 1 foot of snow. This is the days with number of days with 1 inch or more snow cover, and typically it would be 43 days. I believe we've had 6 already of 1 inch or more. I think that's about right.
5 or 6.
5 or 6, okay. So we'd have about another 37 days coming. So that's another interesting way to kind of look at the potential seasonal weather that's coming up using analog. The key factors for this winter outlook are the fact that, of course, that we have an El Nino, but it's not a typical El Nino. It tends to be more like an El Nino Modici or Modici, depending upon what part of region you're from. That is that the warmest anomalies are not in the eastern Pacific, but they're in the central Pacific. In fact, there's a pool of cooler water that typically shows up south of that and sometimes filters back into right along the coast of Ecuador. So indeed, this is yesterday's sea surface temperature anomalies, and there's the warmth right along the equator. But notice this large cool pool, which is contrary to the typical El Nino. This looks like a somewhat classic El Nino Modici. So what does that mean? Well, this is the December, January, February North American and U.S. Tendency for temperature anomalies during El Nino Motocais. And there tends to be cold anomalies, primarily in the plains and Mississippi Valley, warm in the far west. Of course, I would favor a ridge in Alaska, which would allow the cold air to be replenishing. Here in the east, northeast, it's kind of a toss-up, some cool, but not all that cold. Precip, there's the kind of El Nino signature of a storm track coming out of the Gulf of Mexico and heading up toward the east coast. Dry outbreaks back here in parts of the Midwest. So the tendency here would be colder and snowier in the southern plains and Great Lakes. A mixed message here in Pennsylvania. Could be a little bit below normal, could be above normal precip, which of course is the combo which makes for snow. In fact, if we look at just El Ninos in general, the effect on the snow season in the data from 1950 to 2015, the yellow dots indicate where it ends up being below average seasonal snowfall, and the blue dots end up being above. And notice how Pennsylvania, Philadelphia is above, but parts of western Pennsylvania are below. So you can pick what you want, and yeah, you can go with that too if you want. I wouldn't, but you could. So here, what do the European models show? So let's look at the dynamic models for the period December, January, February. This information, by the way, is readily available. It's from the Copernicus site, and the Europeans are experimenting with the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, ECMWF. This is the Meteo France temperature and precip forecast on the left side. Their composite or multi-system, which includes not only ECMWF, but the UK Met Office, Meteo France, also the Canadians, and the Dutch, the Deutsch, the Germans. So here's the French are rather adamant that it'd be cool. This looks like an El Nino Motocai with precip primarily in the deep south. The composite, which would include the ECMWF and 4 other centers, still averages, and this is unusual, by the way. I've looked at this stuff for a while, near or slightly below average temperatures for a 3-month period, December, January, February, for the northeastern U.S. And precip, once again, moist along the eastern seaboard. So that's the dynamic models, and there are signs of increasing skill even in the seasonal forecasts, especially when the standard deviations are relatively big as they are in the wintertime. If you use the analog technique that I've come up with, and there are other analog techniques, but in this case, I simply picked 4 anomalies for the month of November. This was through the 22nd. I don't think it changed substantially. Cold northern plains, mild Florida, dry in the southwest, actually in the Colorado River Basin, and wet, of course, in the east. These are the years in common, and the yellows indicate the years that are in common for 3 of the 4 anomalies. And then to the right, this is the temperature departure. This is actually January to March, and this is the precip departure. And lo and behold, it actually would favor cool in the western U.S. and warm in the east. So we are getting a mixed message here, and part of it, I think, may be because of whether it's El Nino Standard or El Nino Motocai. Survey of our select private weather companies and what their prediction is for the upcoming winter would show that the old Farmer's Almanac predicts a fairly wide area of warm and wet, or mild and wet. It's probably a more reasonable way to call it, over the eastern U.S. So this would be much more similar to what you would expect with a strong traditional El Nino. However, AccuWeather, which has some relationships there, old Farmer's Almanac, shows wet and chilly in the southeast. You know, if you forecast enough different things, one of them's bound to be right. That's kind of the rule here. Interesting to note is that WeatherBell has been consistently predicting, this forecast was issued on the 6th of August, cool in the southeastern U.S., which is actually going to probably be the case in December, because all this cool air is the greater anomalies. We're slightly below normal, but the big anomalies are in the deep south. And look at this, this forecast of 167% of snowfall in this area. This may be this weekend's storm. May be sufficient to actually verify that forecast. So in Pennsylvania, the message is 2/3 expect somewhat colder and a bit snowier than average. If you look at the AccuWeather, the Weather Bell, but Farmers Almanac says no. The official National Weather Service forecast from the Climate Prediction Center indicates that warmth would dominate in the northwestern U.S. and actually pretty much from the northern plains all the way to the west coast. And there's a large area of uncertainty or near normal, which some folks interpret as probably maybe the area that could be cooler than normal. The precipitation dry across the north, wet across the south. That's kind of a classic El Nino signature as well in terms of the wet there.
Yeah.
And here the message in Pennsylvania is weighing on the milder and slightly wetter side, primarily in eastern Pennsylvania, but they're 3 months out. Who can tell that much detail, that much granularity? So I'm going to stick with the forecast. God doesn't make mistakes, but people do. So this is subject to mistakes. The highlights of, and this is what Rob and I talked about, and Ben was involved with producing this too. The forecast that was on Weatherworld on the 13th of November essentially went for frequent periods of above normal temperature. I know it's December and we're only 4 days in, but my thinking is that we're going to exhaust the cold air that's around, or at least we'll bring a mixture of mild air in from the Pacific for a dominant period of time. So I think that there'll be plenty of opportunities for it to be above normal, slightly above normal. And I think when we look at the 3-month period, December, January, and February, it'll probably end up averaging just a little bit above normal, which is, it's very hard to have a 3-month period averaging below normal unless one of those months is very cold. And we may have spent that in November. Because I just can't really necessarily see that it's going to reload for December. However, having said that, the coldest episodes may very well occur during the month of January. Now, some of these are based upon analogs that Ben did earlier for long shots, and also some stuff I had done. Similar message is that the January could be the coldest month of the three. Of course, it is on average anyway, but it may also bring the coldest outbreaks. I'm going to stick with this, even though half the month is within the forecast site, that there'll be record warmth. Rich and I were talking over this, that when the southeast ridge rears itself, it just comes back very strong. And although it's not necessarily showing up right away, especially with the southern branch disturbance going by, I think once it goes by, early part of next week, the shortwave ridge in the north and the what may end up being a long-wave bridge off the East Coast may come into phase and produce some record warmth. And at this time of the year, record warmth almost always ends with heavy rain. And of course, what's the news about that, since we now have the wettest year on record, right? So, and then there's some reason to believe that February will be a wet month. Of course, it's short, so it's hard to get wet for too long. But that would be the month where I think there's opportunity for snow, and maybe even a crippling snowstorm. What we had back in November, maybe it'll be a bookended type of winter, early and then late, if you want to consider February late. So that's pretty much it, I think, for, if any, I love that little logo there. If you need to use the restrooms. And I always like to put a plug in. This is my clan, yeah. So these are my kids. They're not kids anymore. My son's probably a good 5 inches taller than me, and my daughter is looking good at this point. But these little munchkins, my 3 grandkids, are not growing up anymore. We want to keep them at that age for a while. Any questions, comments?
I have a comment for you. When you compare these long-range forecasts, I noticed like some of the terminology by some is really so vague. It's, like the Weather Service has a temperature increasing.
Yes.
Whereas, wintry mix, what does that mean?
Really?
You can't say it's going to be cold. It's like some of them. It's hard to make comparisons to these vague ones.
I agree. In fact, part of the challenge, well, when I get the crap award for the Farmers Almanac, the Farmers Almanac crap award, I said for their summer forecast, it just said muggy with thunderstorms. Well, that's going to happen.
Sounds like July 4th.
Yeah, really. Well, tell me something I don't already know. Yeah, you're right. These that's why I had to pick specific words. where it said warm in the Northern Rockies, where it was actually cool, and it said cool and dry in the Intermountain West, where it was actually hot and relatively moist. So that's why they got the crack. Yeah, you're right. I think it's bogus. Yes.
Just out of curiosity from looking at this now, not that I'm just not very familiar with anomalies or variants in the Southeast, but would a -5 3-month period anomaly near Atlanta, would that essentially be knocking on like record breaking? That just seems very bullish. I'm talking about the weather bell.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at it too. I'm just making sure I'm reading the -5. Yeah, that would be very bullish. That would be
3 months?
3 months. Yeah. That's why it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. The way that typically happens, and the way we ended up with a really cold DJF, December, January, February, say for example in 2014, I think it was 2014, maybe it was 2015, was we had a phenomenally cold February. In fact, it was maybe the second or third coldest on record, and that was sufficient to change the sign of the 3-month anomaly. People don't live in 3-month time frames, So in one sense, you can issue this, but it might send a message certainly for December. It's sending a message it's going to be cold in the Southeast and the snowfall. This may have been a very good 1-month forecast. It was issued back in August for December. Yeah, I agree. I think that would be historic. If they're right, I'm sure they'll make sure all their clients, future clients, will know too.
In my experience in yours, it's like if you get cold in December, sometimes it's hard to keep 2 consecutive, let alone 3 consecutive months when you're really cold. Eastern United States, especially.
Very different. That's why the winters 77, 78 was so unbelievable, because it was cold for 3 months. It wasn't quite as cold in January as it had been in December and in February, but yeah, those were the days when cold could hang on for several months in a row. Not anymore. There's a surcharge on cold. Yes. Oh, Steve. Yeah.
How would you compare the skill of the statistical models versus the dynamical models?
Steve, I've become more and more impressed by the dynamic models. I think the 1-month forecast, because the CFS, GFS, does have a 1-month outlook too, and I really look carefully at that. I think it has increased substantially. Of course, right on the cusp. I think it's in the first quarter of 2019 where we're going over to the new model.
FP3.
Yeah, FP3. So it'll be curious to see. Of course, the preliminary runs say this should be a incremental increase in scale. So perhaps what we were just seeing as the tip of the iceberg might actually take a big leap forward in the dynamic models for seasonal forecasting. Because I believe they'll be using that model for the seasonal forecast too. So it'll replace the core of the CFS. Yeah, it's a great time. This is an exciting time to be into sub-seasonal and seasonal forecasting. Glad I'm retired, so I can do it at my leisure rather than trying to get grants and write papers.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, there are plenty of cookies left. Please help yourself. And most importantly, I wish you all, especially the students here, very best in your finals. Do well. We're depending upon you keeping the high stature of Penn State going. No pressure on that.
No pressure.
And also, I wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thanks. Thanks again for coming out today. This is my last time running.
Oh, yeah.
We actually have the new president right here, Matt Honig, so he will be in charge of the briefings next semester. So we'll see you then.
Well, I like to have it.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.